On average, there are more than 500 homicides in Canada each year. In most cases, these numbers reflect isolated crimes involving a single victim. On rare occasions, however, one murder can trigger something even more ominous. Perhaps the biggest threat to the general public is the unpredictable spree killer, the fugitive criminal with nothing left to lose. Monday, the 22nd of January, 1990. In Toronto, Ontario, 63-year-old Albert Phillip followed his normal routine, rising before dawn for his cleaning job at a downtown car park. He left his wife and 13-year-old daughter sleeping.
Mr. Phillips was a family man, well liked by the people that he worked with, just a good, solid citizen. He worked at the parking garage, started very early in the morning. In fact, on that day in question, he started at 4:44 a.m. We know that he drove his vehicle to the garage, that he parked it in the garage.
As Albert Phillip left his car, a figure emerged from the shadows. The morning was about to take a sudden, violent turn. "7:30 a.m., dawn. 3 hours had passed since Mr. Phillip left home. His wife had overslept, puzzled that she'd missed the customary wake-up call her husband usually made each morning from work. She phoned the parking building's office, but there was no answer. She then contacted another employee in the building who agreed to check on her husband. Just before 8 a.m., the employee reached the downstairs office. Inside, he found Albert Phillip lying in a pool of blood. Although unconscious, he was still breathing.
This gentleman of 63 years of age was beaten senselessly about the head. There were several fractures to his skull. There were significant injuries to his body, in particular his hands.
Within minutes, paramedics and police were on the scene.
It was so violent, so serious, that the initial investigators realized that Mr. Phillip may not survive his injuries and may in fact die, and it would become a homicide investigation.
He was an older man. He knew he was in rough shape, and he was fighting for his life.
As Albert was rushed to hospital, his wife and daughter were told the terrible news.
His family was shocked. This was a kind, gentle man. We had learned some family history about Mr. Phillips. His family had provided us with the nature and the character of this gentleman who was known to be very caring. He would assist the homeless. He would feed the homeless.
We had an opportunity to speak with Mr. Phillips' wife and daughter to give them some confidence that we would find out who was responsible for this attack and bring them to justice.
One of those hoping to shed light on the attack was forensic expert Brian Lai. If Albert died, the evidence left at the scene could be the only way to identify the attacker.
In an assault case, if the victim survives, he can generally identify the attacker. But when it goes to a homicide, this person can no longer speak. So we have to speak for the deceased. The first thing you do is you look around the scene just with your own eyes. We would then photograph the scene or videotape the scene to preserve the scene as we first find it.
Items around the office help police reconstruct the crime. Albert Phillips' time card had been punched, confirming that he'd made it from his car to the office. Nearby, however, his hat lay crumpled on the floor, suggesting that he was probably surprised shortly after punching in and before he'd had time to change or begin work. police discovered a metal bar with traces of blood, the weapon used in the severe beating. In addition, Albert Phillips' false teeth were discovered underneath the radiator, a sign of brutality that shocked even seasoned veterans.
I remember that to this day, like 14 years later. This man must have been beaten really bad about the head to cause his teeth to come out of his mouth.
Nearby, investigators found Albert Phillips' wallet, emptied of its contents. The mid-80s estate car that he'd arrived in that morning was also missing. But given the prolonged nature of the beating, police found it hard to accept the simple motive of robbery.
This was a caring father. If someone had asked for the car or in some other fashion demanded the car, he probably would have given it up. There was no necessity for this.
Expanding their search to the rest of the building, police discovered another key piece of evidence.
It was at this point that all kinds of found property was located, in particular a knapsack, which was left hanging on a thermostat, coincidentally close to the area where Mr. Albert Phillip always parked his car.
The bag contained clothing. It might have belonged to the perpetrator, abandoned just seconds before the attack. While detectives continued to comb the scene, the only witness to the crime was about to undergo surgery on the fractures to his skull. At the same time, the man who attacked him was still on the loose and preparing to strike again. "1:15 p.m. More than 100 kilometers to the southeast in the small city of St. Catharines, 28-year-old resident Sandy Bellows was running errands.
At that time I worked at Bell Canada. I had been married approximately a year and a little bit. No children yet, had lived in this house approximately a year, and things were going in the right direction.
She parked near the credit union bank. In the same parking area, a man was sitting in a mid-80s estate car, identical to the one driven by Albert Phillip earlier that morning.
I did notice a person smile at me in the car, but again, I was in St. Catharines, I smiled at everybody. It's a smaller city. It was a safe community. Bad things didn't happen in St. Catharines.
After doing her banking, Sandy returned to her car.
I was kind of slouched over going to put my keys in the ignition, and that's when someone had grabbed me by the arm, and I thought it was a knife in my neck and telling me to shut up and get over. And my world totally changed at that point.
The man quickly took control of Sandy's car, keeping her as a hostage.
I begged him to let me go, and that's when he told me that if I didn't shut up and if I didn't pay attention, he was going to use this knife to kill me. And I was still in shock, still in disbelief, and just hoping I was waking up from this horrible nightmare. But it was like a dream, because I really didn't think something like this was going to happen in St. Catharines. And I didn't realize that I was on my way to the worst journey in my entire life. Didn't know then. I knew I was in danger, I knew I was in great danger, and I knew my life was at stake, but I didn't know how much at that point.
The 22nd of January 1990. In Toronto, Ontario, a violent attack had left a 63-year-old man in critical condition in hospital. While police investigated that crime, a related scenario was unfolding in the nearby city of St. Catharines. A young woman named Sandy Bellows had been taken hostage by a dangerous, unpredictable man.
He told me that we had to look like a married couple. He had to get away from the police, and the only way of doing that is to kidnap someone like me. I was begging for my life and crying, and he told me to shut up. And he said that he would let me go if I cooperated once he was out of the heat.
This individual leaves her with the impression that some people didn't cooperate, the police are after him for things that he's done over the past umpteen hours.
And he said something went wrong, really, really wrong. He didn't mean for it to happen, but it did. And I said to him, I don't want to know anything. He says, well, when the police find you, you have to make sure you tell them that I was a real nice guy. He told me his name was John. He's introducing himself to me as if he's trying to be my friend, but at the same time, he's threatening he's going to kill me.
After driving west on main roads for more than an hour, Sandy's captor made a sudden turn into an isolated section of woods.
And that was the very first time I thought, I'm in over my head, I'm in real danger. And that's when all of a sudden just everything totally changed. His personality, I was now more than petrified. And I said, what are you doing? You promised to let me go. And I was hysterical at this point. Just like some sort of savage animal. He told me that he was going to have fun with me. He was going to rape me. For the words, he was going to rape me. I was frozen. He grabbed me and he threw me in the back seat of the car and brutally hit me, beat me, raped me. I didn't really believe this was happening. I mean, I felt it, I saw it, and I just thought, he's an animal. But I knew then that I was going to be killed. I knew then that I was in grave, grave danger.
Nearby in the woods, retired police officer Alan Pike happened to be doing some logging work when he noticed the unfamiliar vehicle where the assault was taking place.
I came around that corner to come this way, and I saw a car sitting right here.
He believes, at first glance, that it's probably Parkers that have pulled off the road and they're just, young lovers.
Seconds later, Sandy's captor noticed the approaching tractor.
All of a sudden, he turned on me again and he said there was a man coming, that I'd better get up and not do anything stupid.
I saw a fella get out of the back right rear door of the car. He had to pull up his pants.
At that point, I started to run.
Then out came a girl, and she was naked.
In full view, the man chased Sandy down.
The first blow, I remember, I'll never forget that, was right to my head here. And it was so powerful that I remember falling down.
Mr. Pike realizes that things are going very wrong at this point.
So I gave throttle and full throttle. I couldn't pick up my speed. He kicked her at least 6 times right in the head.
And then he started stabbing me.
It was a murder in progress.
With no time to waste, Alan Pike grabbed his axe from the floor of the tractor.
He was just about to give her the last shot through the heart. And he looked up and saw me coming off the tractor because I was just about in midair. I never killed anybody in my 35 years on the OPP. And I would have killed that guy. And he flung himself backwards and ran for the door of the car. Got in, spun his wheels, took off.
And at that point, Mr. Pike takes a swing at the car, smashes out right side rear window.
Tried to pull myself into the car, and I was about halfway in, and he was just terrified. I wasn't in the car, so I pushed myself out, and he disappeared out around the bend in the road, so he got away from me.
The man showed no signs of slowing down. After getting Sandy's car stuck in snow on a back road, he moved on foot to a farmhouse. Inside, he threatened an elderly woman with a butcher's knife, demanding she supply him with another vehicle. Soon after, in a desperate bid for cash, he successfully held up a local bank in the small town of Paris, Ontario. Within an hour, heavily armed police were combing the area. Near the credit union where Sandy Bellows had been abducted, investigators found the mid-80s estate car belonging to Albert Phillip, with its motor still running. It enabled them to connect the recent spree with the attack in Toronto earlier that morning.
We were dealing with a suspect in multiple types of violent crime, going between multiple jurisdictions within Ontario, and we knew that we had a very dangerous situation on the go.
Hoping to focus their manhunt, police sought the help of the latest victim.
All I wanted to do was sleep. I just wanted to go home. Next thing you know, there's all these police officers there, there's all these people talking to me, wanting to know what went on.
Due to her being able to speak with us, that was very pivotal in the investigation because she was able to give us things that unfortunately Mr. Phillips could not. She was able to describe this individual in size, in height, in age, and some descriptors as far as tattoos. Tattoos are something that are very individual.
Based on Sandy's description, a province-wide alert was issued for a man in his early 20s with long blonde hair. He could go by the name of John, and he had a tattoo on his arm bearing the name Johnny or Joni.
This person will go to any ends to get transportation or shelter, including breaking and entering and stealing cars.
He was wanted for robbery, rape, attempted murder, and by the end of the day, murder itself. As feared, 63-year-old Albert Phillip passed away in a Toronto hospital.
Mr. Phillips had been taken to St. Michael's Hospital and had been operated on. His injuries were so significant and so severe that he did not survive those injuries.
The investigation now involved the Ontario Provincial Police, or OPP, as well as officers from various city forces.
I knew the night would be very long if there was any sleep at all to be had.
Local residents around Brantford, Ontario, were urged to keep their doors closed and locked. It was the first of many fearful nights to come.
I'm afraid somebody might break into the house and hurt me or hurt the kids.
Well, right now I'm scared to death of going outside. It's really weird.
The community concern began to elevate. Here's a man who's on a rampage, a spree of different kinds of crimes, and we'll stop at nothing. We'll stop at absolutely nothing.
Tuesday, the 23rd of January 1990. A violent crime spree in Ontario, Canada, had left one victim dead and another injured and traumatized. With a description of the suspect in circulation across the country, police sorted through the incoming leads. Dave Crane led the investigation for the OPP.
So you get a lot of calls from individuals and police agencies saying, you may want to look at this individual. That person fits the description and has similar tattoos, maybe. You have to start focusing in on who the best suspects are at this point in time. You've still got someone on the loose, which is great danger to the community.
While some officers followed up leads, others examined the evidence from the rampage the day before. The cars belonging to Albert Phillip and Sandy Bellows were towed to a warehouse where forensic experts went over them inch by inch. The best clue came from the estate car stolen from the Toronto parking building.
It was photographed and examined. The car is virtually dismantled from the inside out. We're looking for fingerprints, obviously, to put the accused in there. Subsequently, during the course of examination of the car, a fingerprint was developed and located on the inside door handle of the driver's side.
Although it was only a partial print, investigators hoped that the National Police Database in Ottawa would provide them with a match and a name.
We wanted to identify these fingerprints as soon as possible, obviously, so I made the decision to drive them to the airport, and I personally handed them to the pilot of the flight going to Ottawa, and he would ensure that he would hand them to an OPP officer at the other end in Ottawa.
Later that day, the partial print was entered into the database. Unfortunately, it was not complete enough to allow for a proper search. By late Tuesday, despite having dozens of officers on the case, investigators were no closer to identifying their fugitive. The following day, there was a shocking new development. Wednesday, the 24th of January, morning. In London, Ontario, it was reported that 25-year-old Charlene Britton had been missing for more than 3 days. Along with her family, close friend Jay Ostrom was among those trying to track her down.
Charlene was, she was one of those people that you meet that you couldn't find anything bad to say about. She's a pretty special girl to me.
Before she went missing, Charlene had spoken of meeting a young man with long blonde hair and numerous tattoos, a description that now matched that of one of Canada's most wanted men.
Her best friend was worried about that it could be the guy they're looking for.
The same morning, investigators got their best lead yet. A parole officer called the police. She told them that their suspect could be a former client of hers, an ex-convict named Peter John Peters. Peters was a 28-year-old caretaker whose criminal record included pointing a firearm as well as forcible confinement. He was known by many in London as the Tattoo Man for his habit of displaying his body art while strutting shirtless down city streets.
We knew from his parole records that he had a troubled youth, that there had been conflict within his household. His criminal record demonstrated criminal activity from a very young age. A criminal record which clearly demonstrated an escalating level of violence.
The name also rang a bell with those who knew the missing Charlene Britton. It was the man their friend had spoken of meeting. That afternoon, investigators carefully moved in on Peter John Peters' basement flat in London.
The police subsequently attended and entered the residence and looked around. They could see no sign of Charlene Britton. However, there was a door with a lock and hasp on the door. The police popped the lock off the door and located the body of Charlene Britton.
She was supine on the floor, unclothed, had obviously sustained a stab wound in the back. She was very much deceased.
Also in the room was a vast collection of pornography.
There were hundreds and hundreds of these files. In our view, the link between the pornography and the violent act was demonstrated in that room for all of us to see.
News soon spread of the terrible discovery.
I was at work and I got a call. She'd been murdered. I was devastated, to say the least. As far as her family, I couldn't imagine what they went through.
Since she'd been dead for at least 3 days, it seemed likely that Charlene Britton was Peter John Peters' first victim, killed at the start of his crime spree. After murdering Charlene, Peters must have fled to Toronto. Before long, he needed money and a car. The backpack, discovered where Albert Phillip was attacked, belonged to Charlene.
The contents of it were spilled beside her body. It was used to put his clothes in, transported to Toronto. In the course of the violence that was perpetuated against Mr. Phillips, it's dropped, it's left, it's forgotten about, but it established a link.
Adding to the evidence, the partial fingerprint discovered in Albert Phillip's car, that was not complete enough for a proper police computer trace, appeared to match Peter's print on file when compared manually.
At that point in time, Peters became the suspect by virtue of the fact he had one deceased person in his own closet at home. His description fit what we were getting from Ms. Bellows. We were able to get fingerprints, we were able to get photos. The thing started moving very rapidly at this point.
We didn't know where he was, but we knew who we were looking for.
By late Wednesday, the police had gone public with their suspect's name, initiating one of the largest manhunts in Canadian history. At that time, John Duncanson was working as a crime reporter for the Toronto Star.
I remember they sent over a photo to us. I was kind of shocked because his eyes looked menacing, but he looked like the boy next door sort of image too. I envisioned some scraggly haired monster. He looked more like a playboy kind of, you know, than a killer.
While the picture of the tattoo man was circulated, police attempted to control escalating public panic.
There was this heightened sense of fear everywhere.
Pretty scared, very scared as a matter of fact, especially since I got small kids. If everybody's scared, they're locking all their doors on the street.
And there were some crime prevention tips that we offered as well, because there was quite a buying spree on home security systems and locks.
Police has basically said Southern Ontario is a stalking ground right now. Stay away from this green-eyed, blonde-haired guy. A spree killer like this is someone who's completely unpredictable. John Peters was out of control, and they knew it. So I think there was a general concern within the policing community that if they didn't get him quickly, that more people would die.
Everyone was aware of who we were looking for. It was front page news everywhere.
It was a Canada-wide, actually North American-wide search for this suspect.
Although police were not aware of any new attacks in the past 48 hours, they had little doubt their suspect would strike again.
A serial killer will often there would be a cooling off period for months, even years before they strike again. This guy was not going to stop. He was like a caged animal, and he'll do anything to get out of that cage.
12 p.m., Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario. Hundreds of kilometers from where he was last spotted, a clean-cut John Peters disembarked after a long bus ride. Although the police still believed he was far to the south, he wasted little time in making his presence known.
Within yards of getting off the bus, he attempts to take another victim.
A woman was brushing the snow from her car. A man approached her, who we now know to be Peters, and he said to her, "Get in the car or I'll kill you." She couldn't believe what she was hearing, and he had to repeat that on 3 occasions, "Get in the car or I'll kill you." Finally, she realized this was something that was extremely dangerous, and she fled.
As the tattoo man took off, the woman contacted the police. When told the story, they immediately knew who they were dealing with.
Every available officer at that point in time was dispatched to get out and start looking for this particular vehicle.
1 p.m. Now on back roads outside Sault Ste. Marie, Peters had difficulty navigating the fresh snowfall. For the second time that week, he abandoned a stranded vehicle and took off on foot.
And from there stems a whole series of violent activities where he attempts to gain weapons. His focus is on guns.
In a nearby home, 19-year-old Bob Johnston was watching TV when the door was suddenly kicked in.
Peters breaks into the home, and with a knife that he has, he approaches this young man and indicates that he's there and he's going to get guns. He needs guns. Do you have guns?
Peters forced the teenager to produce shells and load the family shotgun, a knife held to his throat. Peters noticed that a crew from the electricity board had stopped outside, near the car he'd abandoned only moments earlier.
Peter sees them examining the car, and he aims at the individuals. The young gentleman in the home talks him out of it, saying they didn't do anything to you, there's no need to kill them. I believe, and the rest of the investigators believe, that he prevented more murder.
Once he'd persuaded Peters not to shoot, Bob Johnston agreed to help the intruder find another car. 2 p.m. Just down the road, Reverend Ron Hubbard was visiting an elderly parishioner named Ernie Catling. The Reverend had left his car parked in front.
Ernie Catling was retired. Our relationship was I think, quite close. I would visit him at least once a month. As we were talking, we saw two men walking up the driveway. When they walked into the house, the young man immediately put his hands up in the air. The man behind him had the gun, holding the gun on him. And it was the young man, Bob, that first mentioned anything. And he said, just do as he says, because he means business. He asked Ernie whose car it was, and Ernie said it was mine, so he turned the gun on me.
He believes the Reverend isn't a Reverend at all. He doesn't trust that, and at that point in time, he raises the weapon to shoot.
And he started yelling, "You're a cop, you're a cop." I really thought we were going to die at first. It looked like he was ready to pull the trigger. We honestly thought that that was it. He was going to shoot us all.
Fearing for his life, Reverend Ron Hubbard showed Peters the credentials in his wallet.
That satisfied him. That made him happy. And then he wanted my keys.
Peters destroyed the phone line before leaving in Hubbard's car. The group crossed the road in search of help.
Within minutes, it seemed, there were police all over the place. And they showed us a picture of him. They said, "Is that the man?" We said, "Yes. He doesn't have long hair anymore, but that's definitely the man."
While police spread out across the area, Peters was bogged down once more on a side road smothered in heavy snow. He was again forced to flee on foot.
At this point in time, he's breaking into places. The violence is increasing because now he's starting to shoot out locks, and the crime spree has really picked up speed.
Peter John Peters burst into another house and threatened a woman with his shotgun. After she handed over the keys, he fled in her Ford Tempo. As the Tattoo Man, Canada's most wanted fugitive, skidded along back roads in northern Ontario, the police net closed in on all sides.
There is no question this crime spree would have continued its path of violence until it was ended by a police officer in some fashion.
It's inevitable he would be caught, but it was just, is he going to be caught before more people are harmed or murdered?
The 25th of January 1990. Outside Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario, police had blocked off roads in an attempt to contain a rampaging criminal. Ex-convict Peter John Peters, also known as the Tattoo Man, had killed at least twice and had threatened the lives of many others.
We had been talking about various theories about the way this individual was committing his crime, where he would eat, sleep, and kill, eat, sleep, and kill. Where he would commit a series of crimes, he would rest, and then he would commit a series of crimes and rest. Our pursuit was taking away the rest, and he was going to run out of stamina.
Every time Peter John Peters moved, he stole a car and dumped the car somewhere else. And I think they just draw the links between where the cars were stolen and where Peter John Peters was moving.
4 p.m. Two OPP constables on patrol noticed the Ford Tempo, recently stolen by Peters, as it drove towards a main road. They fell in behind. Knowing their suspect was armed and dangerous, they waited until he neared the roadblock ahead before taking action.
I'm sure the police were under instructions that they weren't going to take any chances with this guy.
When finally signaled to stop, Peter John Peters complied. Although he had a loaded shotgun with him, he quickly realized that he was outnumbered.
I thought he would have gone down fighting. He turned out to be a coward in the end and just gave up.
Peters gets out of the vehicle, puts his hands up. At that point in time, the coat falls off him to the ground, and he's instructed to lay down in the snow, which he does. He's handcuffed and taken into custody.
His 5-day crime spree was over. News of the tattoo man's capture swept the province.
I think there was a great sense of relief knowing that he wouldn't be able to hurt anyone else. I believe that there was a sense of relief everywhere.
In the wake of his arrest, Peters faced more than 3 dozen charges across Ontario, including 2 counts of murder. The 28-year-old said little about what had caused him to embark on his rampage. But investigators were left with little doubt that it was his insecure and possessive attitude towards women that had sparked his deep, uncontrollable anger. Police soon learnt that prior to meeting Charlene Britton, Peters had been romantically involved with his parole officer. She had provided police with a vital tip-off regarding his identity.
She helped him find a job in London, Ontario. And what is known is that 2 months before the spree began, something happened in that relationship, and it ended. And that's when all this started to happen.
Wounded and angry, Peters had tried to start a relationship with an unsuspecting Charlene Britton.
Charlene was a very good individual, and she was intimidated when she discovered his tattoos and his background. Maybe this wasn't the guy for her. He pleaded with her to give him a chance, and they had an argument. And he decided that he couldn't have her, then nobody could. And he took her life in a very cold-hearted fashion.
At that point, with blood on his hands, the tattoo man escalated his violent spree.
Peter John Peters was on the hunt for a car. He had come across Mr. Phillips, and Mr. Phillips had gotten in the way, and he was bludgeoned to death.
He didn't tell us very much about Mr. Phillips, other than he was there and that he was in a blind rage.
In my humble opinion, I felt that when he was going away, he would be going away for a very, very long time.
Faced with overwhelming evidence against him, the tattoo man eventually pleaded guilty. In courtroom after courtroom across Ontario, he confessed to his chronicle of crime. In his final appearance, he was confronted by Sandy Bellows, the young woman he had abducted and raped after killing Albert Phillip. She read a victim impact statement before sentencing.
So when I was told I had to prepare for court, I then realized that not only was I preparing for myself, I was also preparing for Charlene Britton and Albert Phillips. So it was like I was going to court for all 3 of us.
If there was a dry eye in the room, those people, I bet, had a big lump in their throat.
She had the entire courtroom, in fact, the judge, wiping tears.
I wasn't some rape victim. I was myself, Sandy Bellows, and I had to fight for myself. At the very end, the judge said to me, "Is there something that you would like to say?" And I said, yes. I said, "I would like to know why. Why you did this to me, John. Why did you feel you had to do this to me?" And I remember seeing him, and he slammed back on the prisoner's docket, and he said, "I don't know."
There was no emotion from Peters. That tells me he is a cold killer that has no emotion. He can't appreciate the damage that he caused and the number of victims that are piled up in his wake.
Peter John Peters received a total of 3 life sentences in jail for his catalogue of crimes.
I won. I finally won because I was walking out of there a free person, and he was shackled and he was going to prison. He's going to prison. He's going to rot in hell. You're not.
For the families of Albert Phillip and Charlene Britton, no amount of justice can bring back a caring father and a beloved daughter.
He maintained contact with his family. And the devastation of the events of that date linger today, as in many of the victims. They continue to be affected the many years after this has occurred.
Charlene was a nice girl. She was a real sweetheart. I think she touched a lot of hearts, and that had a big effect on a lot of people.
Sandy Bellows, who managed to survive, feels indebted to the man who made that possible. For his role in rescuing her, Alan Pike received a citation from the Ontario Provincial Police, the first officer to get such an award after retirement.
When Sandy found out that I was getting a citation, she wanted to be there. When the deputy commissioner was going to shake my hand, before I took his hand, I said, "Sir, the lady that was involved in this matter and the reason that I'm here is at my table, and I'd like her at my side." She jumped out from behind the table and came straight up, and she was only about 10 feet away from me. She started to cry, put her arms out, came up, threw her arms around me, and she looked very defiantly at everybody that was in the room, and she said, "I just want everybody in this room to know that if this man hadn't gotten involved, I wouldn't be alive here today." And it brought the tears to the eyes of absolutely every man and woman in that room.
He was my guardian angel. He was there. I was at the wrong place at the wrong time. We're all really good friends. And he doesn't have any daughters, so I'm kind of like the daughter he didn't have.
Peter John Peters is still serving time in a Canadian prison.
John Peters, as far as I'm concerned, should never get out of prison. I believe in capital punishment. I believe an eye for an eye.
This was just barbaric criminal behavior. It was a very sad case, but a very fulfilling case, because at the end of the day,